We still have lots of work, you and me, to do to educate people what that means and why. Because as you know, prevailing opinions are completely opposite. You must eat healthy whole grains, part of every meal, every snack. It's so we made a dent in it, but there's still tons of people who are skeptical, think it's nuts, don't believe it, or have some other reason for not doing it. And yet, as you and I know, it is the key. It's the first step, a big first step in regaining it.
So Fast Like a Girl, it's ready for pre-order now. I hope this book changes your life the way the information has changed hundreds of thousands of women that have applied it. From the bottom of my heart, enjoy and let's get healthy together. Okay, well, we're going to jump right in. And for starters, let me just welcome you to the podcast. I really have been such a fan of your work. You have put out books that have changed the way people think, which as an author, I feel like is so important. So not only am I welcoming you, but just a huge thank you for the work you're doing. So happy to have this conversation.
Thanks for saying so.
And I know, when you're putting a lot of content out there and you're on a mission, sometimes you lose sight of the impact you're making. Maybe not, maybe that's not happening to you, but when you put Wheat Belly out into the world, I was already gluten-free, and I had used a gluten-free diet to really heal myself from Epstein-Barr virus. And I was recommending gluten-free diets to people, and everybody thought I was crazy until your book came out. So I want to start by saying thank you. I hope you know that book transformed the way people looked at gluten. Do you look at it that way?
I think so. We still have lots of work, you and me, to do to educate people what that means and why. Because as you know, prevailing opinions are completely opposite. You must eat healthy whole grains, part of every meal, every snack. It's so we made a dent in it, but there's still tons of people who are skeptical, think it's nuts, don't believe it, or have some other reason for not doing it. And yet, as you and I know, it is the key. It's the first step, a big first step in regaining health.
Yeah. Yeah. And thank you for saying that, because we are going to go into your new book, Super Gut, and talk about fermented foods. But would you say, before we launch into that, the most important thing for gut health is to pull these offensive foods out like gluten? Yeah. Because you could eat all the L reuteri yogurt you want, but if you're still toxifying yourself with gluten, you're not going to make much progress. Is that a good way to look at it? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Awesome. The second thing I have to tell you is that one of my favorite books of all health books of all times is Undoctored. I I love I love that book. And let me tell you why, because I use it to empower patients and people to really stand up to their doctors. Because what I gathered from that book is you really made it clear that somebody who might have a thyroid problem, they may know, and they've researched and Googled the heck out of it. They may know more about that thyroid problem walking into their doctor's office than their doctor may actually know. Do you feel like that still is true and exists?
I think it's becoming more and more true every day as I don't know why, but people are educating themselves, being informed, collaborating, conversing about these things, while my colleagues continue to bury their heads in the sand. And then what kills me is how they can often deliver misinformation with absolute authority and then belittle you.
Yeah,
Did you consult Dr. Google
yeah,
again? You know? So
yeah,
I don't think it's going to change in the foreseeable future, probably generations from now, as the current crop
yeah,
of docs pass away, replaced by, I hope, more open-minded people who embrace information. But yeah, it's not gotten a whole lot
yeah,
better. And in fact, the
yeah,
dominance of big pharma is out of control. That
yeah.
Doctored was the book that earned me a blacklisting from all media, major media.
Oh, really? Oh,
Yeah,
really?
yeah.
Yeah, wow.
I thought it was me at first, but
That's
it's not.
crazy.
It's all of us now. It's you, me, anybody with any kind of an agenda or a book about health or nutrition. So, you and I used to be able to watch like, CBS This Morning or one of these other shows, and you'd see a book author on health, once a week or so, some regularity. or an in-depth expose of some issue in healthcare. Uh, Zero now. Nobody is talking about health and nutrition. In fact, I had a publisher say to me, if we can't make money publishing books on health, maybe we won't publish books on health. Isn't that something?
What?
Yep.
That's crazy.
Yep.
That's crazy. Yeah, which I've thought about this a lot because, in my younger years, I was very focused on how can we overturn big food? How can we overturn big pharma? And I agree with you that we've now entered a time where those industries are so profit driven, they're so integrated into the political system. There's no way we're going to unturn that. So the only thing we can do is empower the individual,
Yep.
don't you think?
I couldn't agree more. Absolutely. We got to get in through the back door.
And Yeah, and so those of you that are listening, as we go through gut health, as what I love that Dr. Davis is putting out there right now is some really good food-based ideas on what we can do to change our microbiome. We have to take our own power back because it's not going to happen. The days where we would walk into our doctor's office and expect to get all the proper answers is no longer amongst something we're living in. Would you agree?
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. So let's dive into Super Gut. Why did you write this book? Let's start with that. I always am curious from an author perspective, what motivated you to write the book?
Well, I saw the wonderful results of people engaged in what I call the wheat belly lifestyle. That is, elimination of all wheat, grains, and sugars, and addressing common nutrient deficiencies, not because of the diet, but because of the modern habits. So, magnesium, for instance, because by necessity, we have to filter our water of sewage and other things. And so, water filtration removes all magnesium. So, we all start with severe magnesium depletion. Iodine, particularly in the Midwest, what used to be called the goiter belt for lack of iodine. So we get iodine because people are cutting back on salt. They're not getting their iodine from iodized salt anymore. Uh, Omega-3 fatty acids because nobody wants to eat brain anymore. That's the primary source, in addition to fish that has mercury or shellfish that has cadmium. So we're stuck with this ultra refined product called fish oil capsules. And then vitamin D because we live indoors. So that collection of things, the diet, those four nutrients that, by the way, when put together, synergize to reverse or minimize insulin resistance and inflammatory phenomena. So it really worked. But I saw people do things like this. Oh, I've lost 73 pounds. My waist is 8 inches smaller. I don't have hypertension anymore. My type 2 diabetes is gone, but I'm still intolerant to nightshades or to histamine causing food containing foods or FODMAPs or fructose or some intolerance, or they had some residual problem, like my rheumatoid arthritis is 70% better. I'm off the biologic. It's saving me several $1,000s a month in copays. I'm off the prednisone, but I'm still having to take naproxen now and then for occasional flares. Why is that? And so I saw some residual problems. And I went, why? And by the way, this was in spite of the basic program having a multi species high potency probiotic and prebiotic fibers. So even though people made those minimal efforts for their microbiome, so I wanted to know if the microbiome, if I dug further, would we find answers? And lo and behold, yeah, there's a ton of answers and there's a ton of new insights coming out in the microbiome now that I cringe to think what we didn't know just a few years ago. Now, as we uncover all the incredible things going on in the microbiome.
Yeah. I get questions a lot about like, what's the best foods for the microbiome? How do you help SIBO? These are the things that we're going to talk about. But one of the things that I've thought about deeply is the food allergies. You speak of those, like how many food allergies we have now. If we stop and think about it, like I don't know any kids at my elementary school that had a peanut allergy. We didn't talk about gluten allergies. We didn't talk about all the bazillion allergies we have now. Do you feel like that's because of what you just said, where our foods are not giving us the same nutrients and that we've got so many toxins in our water, so many antibiotics that people are taking? What is causing all those allergies?
So it's from a disruption of the composition of the gastrointestinal microbiome. All the things you and I and your audience have been exposed to, like common antibiotics, amoxicillin, azithromycin, etc., wipe out literally hundreds of different species in the gastrointestinal tract, in the colon. Well, once you wipe out the good guys, some of the fecal organisms start to proliferate. E. coli, Citrobacter, Klebsiella, they proliferate. The odd thing is, they also, and this surprised me, I was really taken by surprise when I started to think about SIBOs, as you know, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth.
Mhm.
So fecal organisms proliferate in the colon, then ascend up to 24 feet of small
Mm.
bowel. And fecal microbes in the small bowel are extremely inflammatory. And when they die,
Mm.
they some of their breakdown products enter the bloodstream, as you know, a process called endotoxemia.
Right.
And that's part of the whole process that leads to food intolerances. So the vast, not all, but the vast majority of food intolerances are due to this process. It's a multi-step process. SIBO, fecal organisms, endotoxemia. And the small bowel is especially susceptible to this because it only has a single layer of mucus barrier. It's not suited to have fecal organisms,
Mm.
while the colon has a thick two-layer mucus barrier because that's where all these fecal microbes are supposed to be. So one other name for SIBO is fecalization. Is the proliferation of
Mm.
fecal microbes in
Interesting.
the small bowel. The, and you know what convinced me just how widespread SIBO was the availability of this device, the air device. So uh,
Yes.
yeah, so as you know, you blow into it. It's a real time sensor for hydrogen gas. You know, unlike the stuff that some people do in their clinics or labs where you have to capture breath or hydrogen in a tube. Well, it's a
Mhm.
very
Yep.
imperfect process. Hydrogen gas is the smallest molecule there is. You got to cap it really fast, and even then, the gas escapes. So conventional testing for SIBO is flawed, and it tends to underestimate
Mm.
severity. So I think this air device is an improvement over because it's a real time
Mm.
sensor. You blow directly. You put your mouth on, you blow directly into it. Um, and what
Eh
surprised me though was when I started talking about this and thousands of people started testing themselves, was that it was the exceptions who tested negative. Now we could question the validity
Mm.
of the test, except that what I saw happen was people would test positive. By the way, the instructions that come with the device are not right. I did call the inventor, Dr.
Mm.
Angus Short. He's a scientist. He's an engineer in Dublin, Ireland. And I said, Angus, I know you invented this for people with IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, on a low FODMAPs diet. I said, but that's not really what this is. I'm telling the inventor what he invented. I said,
Yeah, that's funny.
it's really a mapping device. You can use it to map
Mm.
where microbes are. You use time, and you can tell where they are. So, now he knows they're trying to change the labeling and instructions, but because he has some regulatory hurdles to get over. But that is how you use it. You use it. You consume some that bacteria metabolize. We use inulin because it's
Okay.
broadly metabolized by
Yeah.
multiple species of SIBO. And then you
Yeah.
time how fast you turn positive, 0 to 10. Let's say you start at 1.2. If it jumps to 9, that's positive. A jump of
Right.
4 would be positive. Yeah. So
Yeah.
when I started having people do this, I was shocked. Now, even better, people would take some steps to eradicate their SIBO and they would test negative. And they would say things like,
Mm.
I finally broke my weight loss plateau, or my rheumatoid arthritis is now gone, or my hemoglobin A1C that dropped from 12.7%, terrible, to 6.1%, much better, but still terrible, is now 4.8%.
Right.
I saw all those residual problems go away.
So is this a test that is accessible to everybody? Is it an easy test to do?
It is easy. It's easy to use. So the instructions on the actual use of the device are okay with the instructions that come with it. But the interpretation, how to use the timing factor, is in my super gut book. And perhaps in future, when Angus Short
Ah.
catches up, they'll put it in the device itself. But right now, I have the full instructions. So the key here is you consume something that bacteria metabolize. So in the lab, they use lactulose, usually a non-digestible sugar.
Hmm.
We use inulin
Mhm.
because inulin has, in other words, what if you choose a sugar or a carbohydrate that only some microbes consume, but not the ones you have?
Mm.
You'll test negative. So I picked the prebiotic fiber or carbohydrate that has the widest species can metabolize this thing. So we chose inulin. So typically
That
two
makes sense.
teaspoons of inulin, like in your cup of your coffee, a cup of coffee, something. So test baseline, consume your inulin, then test every 30 to 45 minutes. If you test positive, a rise of 4 units within the first 90 minutes, you've got SIBO. After 90
Yeah.
minutes up to 180 minutes, 3 hours, it's not quite clear because that could be distal ileum SIBO or it could be
Mm,
just normal colonic fermentation. So that's where some judgment is required. So if somebody says, I tested and I went positive at 110 minutes or whatever, is that positive? Uh, well, typically it's not regarded as positive. But what if a person says, but I've had diarrhea unexplained for years, and I have panic attacks, or I have rosacea, or restless leg syndrome, or polymyalgia. I'm sorry, or fibromyalgia. In other words, conditions
talking
that are
about yeah.
extremely highly associated with SIBO. Even with a negative test, I would say you've got SIBO. So there's some judgment also involved.
Is there a way symptom wise for our audience that might not know what SIBO is, but might be suffering from the symptoms of SIBO? How would we even start that conversation for somebody to understand if they had it?
So there are what I call telltale signs like fat malabsorption, if you see fat droplets in the toilet, or fat staining
Mm,
where the water meets the porcelain, or you have food intolerances, or conditions
mm,
virtually synonymous with SIBO. So irritable bowel syndrome is almost synonymous with SIBO, as is fibromyalgia, restless leg syndrome. Uh, all
mm,
neurodegenerative and autoimmune conditions highly associated with SIBO. Fatty liver, very highly associated. Obesity, type 2
mm.
diabetes. At least 50% of all people have SIBO. The curious thing, though, is if we look back at all the studies that have been done, for instance, if we take several hundred people with irritable bowel and ask how many test positive for SIBO, those studies vary anywhere from 12 to 84%, but typically about 40% will test positive. Uh, but if you look at those studies and look at how many people among the healthy controls also test positive, it's anywhere from a few percent to 44%. In other words, normal ain't normal anymore. So even healthy control
Yes.
test positive.
Mm. Oh my gosh. I would say in my clinical work, I feel like everybody's got some version of SIBO. And I would even throw into that anxiety. A lot of mood disorders are associated with SIBO. Are you seeing that as well?
Yeah, good point. Anxiety, depression, panic attacks. Yeah, very high proportion. There's an interesting series of studies, some done in Germany, uh, asking this question: how come some people don't respond to antidepressants? Antidepressants are stupid. But anyway, but what the
Yes.
question has been asked:
Yes, they are. Mhm.
why do some people don't
Yeah.
respond at all? Well, it's been determined that people who don't respond to antidepressants have higher measures of inflammation, higher C-reactive protein, higher IL-6, IL-1 beta,
Mm,
etc. And so, of course, Big Pharma steps in and says, let's give them expensive biologics for $10,000 a month to
mhm,
address the inflammation. Of course, that's ridiculous. So this German group asked this question. They said, what happens if we inject that endotoxin from the SIBO organisms? Let's take a little bit of that lipopolysaccharide endotoxin, minuscule amounts, and inject them into non-depressed people, which is really daring because if you miscalculate a little bit, you kill the person. So I don't know how they got this through their
right.
institutional review board, but they did. So they injected this endotoxin
Yeah.
into the bloodstream of these non-depressed people, and they became clinically depressed within 3 hours. And they performed MRIs and that showed all the hallmarks of depression. In other words, LPS endotoxin from SIBO now has been conclusively shown to be a major contributor or cause for depression. Now, what proportion of depression?
Yep.
No one knows. No one's done that study, but it's probably a lot. And of course, that won't
Yeah.
respond to some stupid drug to increase serotonin.
Right. Well, did you see the meta-analysis that came out in molecular psychiatry this summer? It basically looked at several different studies on SSRIs and said that depression is no longer a singular thing. They do not believe that it's a serotonin reduction because they have plenty of people who have low serotonin and are happy. Other people that go on antidepressants to raise their serotonin and they're unhappy. So I think that whole world of antidepressants hopefully is being blown apart. Hopefully. So, and I know a lot of people believe they help, but a lot of times they help temporarily. Don't you see that?
If at all. Yes, exactly. They are a miserable class of drugs, famous for their ineffectiveness. No question at all.
Yeah.
I find a
Yeah.
great illustration of the power, in a negative way, of the power of the microbiome in addressing emotions is when you try to eradicate the microbe, you get this die-off reaction, which, as you know, can be profound depression, nightmares,
Yes.
panic attacks, anxiety, irrational behavior. So, I mean, it's a vivid illustration of the effect that microbes can have, their breakdown products can have on the brain and
Yeah.
emotions.
So what do we do if we think we have SIBO? What's our first step? Let's just say we're listening to this, we resonate with all those symptoms, or we do your air device test, which I can't wait to go research, and we get this clear idea that we have SIBO. What's our first step to fixing that?
What I've been doing is, uh, I asked a bunch of questions. What if I just took a commercial off the shelf probiotic? That is a haphazard collection of microbes, no rhyme or reason. There's not a reason why they combine specific microbes. Uh, will my SIBO go away? No. Right? It can reduce the symptoms sometimes, like some less diarrhea, perhaps less cramps and bloating, but it doesn't really eradicate the SIBO in most cases. So I asked these questions. What if we chose species that colonize the upper GI tract? That's where SIBO occurs.
Mm,
And what if we chose
right.
species that produce bacteriocins? These are natural antibiotics effective against the species of SIBO. So I picked three.
Mm,
I picked Lactobacillus gasseri, the BNR 17 strain, upper GI colonization, up to 7 bacteriocins. So it's a bacteriocin powerhouse. I chose Lactobacillus
okay.
reuteri, the DSM 17938, and I'm sorry about these. These strain designations are nuts. And the
No.
ATCP
Yeah.
PTA 6475 strain, and also upper GI colonizer produces up to 4 bacteriocins. So powerful, by the way, my microbiologist friends say, we use reuteri to clean our fermentation vats. I didn't believe them at first, but they do. That's how
Wow.
effective and
Wow.
antimicrobial it is. And then I threw in Bacillus coagulans, the GBI 36086 strain. Now, these are all commercially available, despite the wacky strain designations. We ferment them, but we don't. It looks and smells like yogurt. It's yogurt. It's not yogurt. So when we buy yogurt at the store, it's been fermented for about 4 to 6 hours. We ferment for 36 hours. And the reason for that is, like
Oh, wow.
reuteri, for instance, doubles every 3 hours. Of course, microbes don't have sex. There's no mommy and daddy microbes. They just double. So
Yep.
reuteri doubles every 3 hours at 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Well, in 4 to 6 hours, you've got nothing. So we do 12 doublings. We
Mm,
perform flow cytometry on these yogurts, and we're getting something like 250 to 300 billion counts per half cup serving. And so far, now this is anecdotal, but 40 people have done this for 4 weeks, a little longer than antibiotics, and then tested negative after testing positive at baseline. So far, now we'll do a formal clinical trial, probably in collaboration with Dr. Angus Short in Dublin, but we'll do a formal clinical trial in future to prove. But so far, but
mm,
if the solution I'm proposing is a total colectomy or exploratory
right.
laparotomy, well, we better be damn certain, right, what we're doing. But what if the
Right.
solution is kind of like a yogurt?
It's
So
a yogurt. I was just gonna say, it's so unsexy, but, it's amazing because you can do it at home, right?
yeah, and I kind of regret calling it SIBO yogurt because it makes it seem like it's just for SIBO. It's actually those, certainly the Gasseri and the Reuteri are keystone species. That is, they're very
Mm,
important species that, by the way, we have almost all lost. So they're extremely good
mm,
antimicrobials, those two species, but they're also very susceptible to common antibiotics. So,
mm.
if we were to test the squirrels and the rabbits and the other creatures out, they all have reuteri. If we were to test indigenous
Interesting.
populations, like the people who live in the jungles of New Guinea or jungles of South America, like the Yanomami, or all those indigenous hunter-gatherer populations, they all have reuteri and gastri. We almost none of us
Mm.
have it anymore. So replacing them is extremely helpful. So I'm now drifting over time to the idea that yes, use the SIBO yogurt at first to normalize your SIBO, and then continue to do it with some maybe every third day or something like that. Because I think those two microbes, the loss of them is probably a big part of the reason why there's so much SIBO in this world. I think easily 1 in 2 people have SIBO. I think because of the loss of these microbes.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would agree, in what we're seeing. It's just the microbiome is so decimated by big food and big pharma. I mean, it's just totally, and so all these strange things are appearing. And what I love about this yogurt is that it's anybody can do it. And we got to make health simple. So explain to me the difference. You have a L. reuteri yogurt and then you have a SIBO yogurt. Is the SIBO yogurt just an extension of L. reuteri?
Mhm.
Because I saw a lot of great art. You had a great community talking about your El Reuteri yogurt about 3 years ago, 2 years ago. It was all over your website. So, how would you choose one or over the other?
So the reuteri, so the SIBO yogurt is just good for cleaning up your bowels because of those properties, upper GI
Okay.
colonization, bacteria and production. The reuteri specifically, you can do it as part of the SIBO yogurt, or you can do it separately. When you monoculture something by itself, you get bigger numbers. So in the SIBO yogurt, you probably get about
Mm,
80 billion per species. But if you want a real
yeah.
wallop, you can just cultivate the reuteri. And that's where you see things like, so in addition to upper GI colonization and bacteriocin production, it also sends a signal via the vagus nerve to release the hormone oxytocin. And so people experience
Yay.
things like greater intensity of affection for other people. They become more generous. The part I love
Mm,
is they're more accepting of other people's opinions. So you get along better
we
with your
need that.
coworkers, but there's a bunch of physical effects that also occur that have only recently been recognized. Ladies love it because there's an explosion in dermal collagen, and the wrinkles
Mm,
throughout your body start to be reduced. Ladies say they stop using
wow.
moisturizing creams because you're so moist from the sebum production. They don't need to use moisturizers anymore.
Crazy.
Guys love it because there's a restoration of youthful muscle and strength, a dramatic effect, by the way. I love it because I'm a
Crazy.
chronic insomniac, and now I sleep straight through full 8, 9 hours every night, vivid dreams. There's an increase in libido.
Crazy.
Guys experience an
Crazy.
increase in testosterone. So if you're an older guy like me, you can have a youthful level of testosterone restored. Ladies love it because it also increases
Amazing.
libido and also reverses vaginal atrophy. That, as you know, afflicts many
Which is
ladies.
huge for men. Yeah. Menopausal women. That's
Mhm,
huge.
mhm. There's preservation of
And
bone
s-
density, acceleration of healing. In other words, so what I thought my sort of thing was, wait, acceleration of healing, deeper sleep, smoother skin, greater muscle, increased libido. We're turning the clock back 10, 20 years. And that's what we're
Crazy.
seeing in people who do this. So the reuteri that was
That's
the first microbe I
crazy.
played with. I just happened to stumble on this incredibly powerful microbe.
Yes. And so just so I followed the El Reuteri craze of on your website and people talking about it for a couple of years. Just so we kind of fill the audience in, what does this look like to make this yogurt? Because again, if we go back to where we were in the beginning of this conversation, we've really overcomplicated health. And what you're doing is giving a very simple answer. But not everybody knows how to make yogurt. So is that, can you walk us through like what this would look like to make this and how often we would want to eat it and when we want to eat it?
So I'll use reuteri as the example because that's kind of the prototype. Because in addition to
Yeah.
reuteri, you can ferment other microbes. You can ferment, let's say, Bacillus coagulans that also reduces arthritis pain and accelerates recovery from heavy exercise, or Bifidobacterium infantis that if you give this to a newborn, it sleeps through the night, has 50% fewer bowel movements that are formed, 50% fewer diaper changes from mom and dad. Um, as an older child, less prone to asthma, obesity, type 2 diabetes, and has a higher IQ. So You can ferment different microbes for specific effects. But rotari is kind of the prototype example. So we need to source the microbe. We're currently sourcing it as a commercial product called Biogaia gastrus, Gastrus. Now, here's something to know.
Great.
This is tedious, so I apologize to your audience. This is kind of tedious, but when you play with
Yeah, no
microbes,
worries.
you have to pay attention to strain. Easy illustration.
Yes.
So I have E. coli. Everybody in your audience has E. coli. But what if you ate lettuce contaminated by cow manure with E. coli? Well, you can die of that E. coli. So same species, different strain. So we have to pay attention to strain to
Mm,
some degree when we play with microbes. Now, the strains we're using are the two strains that come in that gastrus tablet. Now, we're doing a mouse trial right now comparing different strains. I want to know if there are strains that are better at it. So we have several
mm,
successive studies ongoing with animals to see if there's differences among the strains. So don't know yet, don't have the results yet. Probably in about, I think about a month we'll have the results. Um, so for now, we go with the strains we know work, and that's the Biogaia gastrus strains. Problem: they sell it to you as tablets made for babies. So the dose is teensy weensy. It's
mm,
100 million of each, which sounds like a lot, but in microbes is nothing. And that was my motivation for making yogurt. We're going to increase the number of microbes 1,000-fold. So when you first start out, what we do is just take the tablets, put them in a baggie, crush them with a mortar or with a rolling pin or heavy jar, anything. So they're all crumbled. Put that in a bowl. We add a prebiotic fiber to feed them. It's like putting cow manure on your garden. You're going to have bigger tomatoes.
yeah,
So put about a tablespoon or
yeah.
so of a prebiotic fiber like inulin or raw potato starch, inexpensive. I reject the idea that we should limit fat. I think that's stupid. So we
Mm,
use organic
agreed.
half, 18% fat. So make a
Beautiful.
slurry first, so everything's suspended, then top it off with the rest. And then you need some device, cover it, saran wrap, whatever, and then keep it in some device at 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Could be a sous vide, a sticker basin sous vide, could be a dehydrator, could be a yogurt maker, could be an instant pot. Some means of just keeping it at 100 degrees, give or take, for 36 hours. First batch, by the way, tends to separate into curds and whey. It's subsequent batches that are more uniform. Don't know why. Don't know why. Uh,
Mm,
and another interesting thing about these yogurts is they all taste different. So Lactobacillus
mm,
reuteri yogurt tastes very different than Lactobacillus brevis yogurt. Tastes very different than Lactobacillus gastriae yogurt. Tastes very different than the SIBO yogurt. Tastes very different than Bifidobacteria infantis yogurt. So it's really an interesting little experiment. But that's what we're doing. And by the way, it doesn't have to be yogurt or dairy. It could be coconut milk. It could be salsa. It could
ah,
be purees, fruit purees.
so
The
yeah,
process of fermentation reduces the sugar content, so it's still perfectly compatible with a low carb type lifestyle. There may be some additional steps though, like with coconut milk. You don't want to buy cans that have some kind of thickening agent in it, like guar gum. I'm sorry, like xanthan gum or gellan gum or carrageenan. That screws it up. So you want just
mm,
coconut milk,
mm.
and then there's a couple extra steps you have to throw in. Use of a blender. You got to add some guar gum because it tends to separate. So it's very easy, but I put all those recipes in the Super Gut book because I had many failed batches before I learned how to do it the right way.
And, what about if you add in raw milk? It's already got a lot of probiotics and prebiotics in it. Is that you're heating it up, so that's gonna die off anyways? Would that affect the did you test that to see if it affected the strains?
Yeah, you have to heat it because in case there's even a minuscule quantity of Listeria monocytogenes or Staphylococcus aureus from the cow's udder, even if there's a little bit, when you ferment, you amplify counts 1,000-fold, and
Yeah.
you could actually die of that yogurt. So it's unlikely.
Yes. So no raw milk. So raw no, don't do raw milk because we have a lot of raw milk fans in this audience. So you're saying don't do this yogurt with raw milk.
So as your listeners know, there's a little bit of teensy risk by consuming raw milk, but you amplify the risk hugely when you ferment it. That's the problem.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm glad I asked the question. And we have a local gal at the farmers market that has fermented salsa. It is the best salsa in the world. So I love that you said we could take these and ferment it in salsa Do you tell us, just so people understand, in your book, are they capsules that you open up and put into this stuff into the salsa and then heat it up for 36 hours? Like, how do we make sure we're getting the right strain, to your point, and especially in the SIBO yogurt, because we've got multiple different bacteria we're putting in, correct?
Yeah. So with salsa, you're going to have to add some starter. So let's say I want to make Bacillus
Mm,
coagulans salsa. I'll take a capsule of Bacillus coagulans and empty it in there. Stir it, of course, cap it. You want to keep air away from it, so you need some means of uh, topping it off with something or a little contraption like a little plate. I use a glass. I have like an old olive
mm,
jar. And I have a drinking glass that fits perfectly in the top of it, and it pushes everything down because you don't want air to contact your fermenting foods because that invites mold,
mm,
fungi, and so
mhm.
and
Yep.
you also want to use, of course, non-iodized salt and filtered water that has no chlorine or fluoride. So, but it's an illustration of just how many antimicrobials we're exposed to in this world. And of course, if you
Yeah,
ferment,
right.
one of my favorite things to do, this is real easy for your listeners, is to make sparkling Saccharomyces boulardii juices. It's real easy. So,
Ooh,
so in case your listeners don't remember, Saccharomyces boulardii is a fungus, and it's probably the most important thing someone can do to preserve the integrity of their microbiome during antibiotics. So let's say you have to take it because you got some bad
mm,
infection. Yeah, sometimes we need to. Well, if you drink this juice, it's
right.
the best thing you can do to preserve, to minimize the loss of bacterial species. So what we do is just buy any juice, any volume, so long as it doesn't have a preservative like potassium sorbate or sodium benzoate. So any juice, but the pulpier the
Mm,
better. So apple cider,
okay.
mango, passion fruit, grape juice, whatever. So
Right.
some of juice, empty a capsule of the commercial probiotic Flora Store. That's Saccharomyces boulardii, just one capsule. Stir lightly, cap. This one can be exposed to air, but you want to cap it though, but cap it lightly because within 24 hours, you're going to see it bubbling. That's how much fermentation is going
Mm,
on. You'll see CO2, carbon dioxide bubbles. And if you cap it too tightly, you'll actually have an explosion on your hands. Ferment for 48 hours on your kitchen
interesting.
counter. It's going to taste like sparkling juice. If you used apple cider, it's going to taste like apple soda.
Amazing.
If you did grape juice, it's going to be grape soda. We only consume quarter, a half cup per serving, maybe twice a day or so, because there is still some sugar. The fermentation process reduces the sugar by 50%, but there's still some sugar, so you want to be overexposed to sugar. But it's a delicious and fun
Yep.
way. It's virtually foolproof to just do this on your kitchen counter.
Interesting.
And this is your way.
Amazing. And are all those go ahead.
This is
No, you
your
go.
way of taking the low counts in the probiotic they sell you and increasing the counts for a greater effect.
It is so genius. I just want to tell you, like, I love what you've done with this to put it in food and give us the power to be able to make it on our own. Is It's just incredible. Are all those recipes in your book? Is that everything you're talking about? So if people want to read more up on it?
They all are, except for the Saccharomyces boulardii juice, sparkling juices, because I thought of that only like 8 months ago.
Of course, yeah. The problem when you write a book, you have to have it ready to go, a year or so before it actually comes out to the world. I get that. I get that. What do you how do you feel about fasting? So that's my passion. I have a book coming out in December called Fast Like a Girl. And I've the research I've seen on fasting is that it's a beautiful way to get some die off of some of these bad bacteria. And I'm wondering if we break a fast with your yogurts, we break a fast with a sparkling, and so you're killing the bacteria while you're fasting, but then you're adding the good bacteria in. Have you tried that? And what are your thoughts on fasting?
We haven't looked at it formally, but I'm going to bet you're right that this is a way to accelerate the process. The downside of fasting is you kill off bad microbes and good microbes. So it's not, in other words, fasting isn't selective for one or the other. And so doing what you're suggesting
Right.
as reimplanting the good guys is a really good idea, especially the ones that take up resident small bowel and produce bacteriocins. So that's a really good idea.
Yeah, I came up with it when I was treating so many SIBO patients. I was like, okay, let's just starve these suckers out. But what I struggled with is to find the right thing to reintroduce. So you just gave me like I can't wait to dive into the book and try the different recipes and then just experiment with that. So those of you that have been following me for a while, let's all do that and then give us feedback, because I look at fasting as just let's wipe the slate clean and now let's repopulate, kind of like tilling, you're getting rid of the old dirt in your garden and then putting new dirt in that can actually your garden can grow from. That's the way I look at it. So have you found that and people need a probiotic at all after they do this yogurt in your community?
As time goes on, I think some people view probiotics as the solution, and they're not. Unfortunately, the current
Agreed.
most commercial probiotics are really nothing more than haphazard collections of microbes. So, in other words,
Agreed.
there are a number of things not incorporated. There's no awareness of what are called guilds or consortia of bacteria. So the only product I know that does that is a product called Sugar Shift, formulated by my
Mm,
friend, Dr. Raul Cano, who is a 40-year academic microbiologist. And Raul asked this question: can we get a collaborative group of organisms that, in this case, consume fructose, sucrose, and glucose in the GI tract? And we gave this to 20 people, and it reduced fasting glucose by 9.8 milligrams in non diabetics, which is on a par with metformin with no side effects.
crazy.
And so that's an
Yeah.
example of a guild or consortium. But I know of no other product that does that, where they actually put together a collaborative guild, or the counts are too low. So if it's 2 billion or 5
Mm-mm.
billion, one of the things we don't have a lot of in the microbial world is dose response evidence. So there, for instance, there's a
Mm.
study in which Rotari, the 6475 strain, was given to ladies versus placebo. And the ladies on Rotari had 50% less bone loss over a year than placebo ladies. That was 10 billion
Mm.
per day. Well, if 10 billion does that, what does 100 billion do? Nobody knows. So we lack a lot of dose response. Though I think the evidence, little by little, is
Mhm.
inching towards the idea that high counts are what we want, like 50 billion, 100 billion,
Mhm.
maybe even a trillion. I've done that. I've taken a trillion, by the way, of Rotari on several occasions with no ill effect. Um, and
Yeah.
there's a failure to include keystone species. If you don't have Gasseri, you made a mistake. If you don't have Rotari, you made a mistake.
Mm.
And so, if all you're taking, say, is Lactobacillus brevis and Bifidobacteria longum, so that's an incomplete probiotic. So there's a lot of problems with current crop. And then there's all these gimmicks with the probiotics, spore based. There is no evidence, zero, to tell us that spore based is superior. That's nonsense. The
Mm.
marketing says things like, "Well, these survive. The spores survive stomach acid and bile." Well, so do the probiotics too. There may be some decline in counts, but they survive. Their
Mm.
Rotari, for instance, is perfectly comfortable at a pH of 1.5, extreme acidity, and
Crazy.
sufficient
Yeah.
to burn your finger
Yeah.
off if you put it in. So there's a lot of gimmickry.
Yeah.
There's a one product getting a lot of press that has it's double encapsulated. Well, why would it's double encapsulated so that it releases its microbes into the colon? What about the 160 million people with SIBO? You want release in the small
Mhm.
bowel. So there's a lot of this gimmickry going on.
Yeah.
There's a recent product that came out. Its claim to fame is that it contains 115 species, and I can't tell where it comes from because they're saying it comes from food, then they say it comes from a human. Don't know, but 115 different species, most of which aren't even labeled properly. Uh,
Mm.
and uh, half of them are what are called proteobacteria, fecal microbes.
Mm.
I got to wonder if the FDA is going to clamp down on that one because, and I took it, I got sick. So I won't say the name,
Mm.
but it's one that has 115
Yep.
strains in it, half of which are fecal microbes, proteobacteria. And so there's a lot of gimmickry in the probiotic. It's going to improve as people like you
Yeah.
and me talk about these kinds of things and maybe even formulate some ourselves. But right now, the last thing on the list that helps restore microbiome is a probiotic. It shouldn't be that way, but it is that way today.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we've commercialized them now, so everybody thinks that's gonna be the solution, right, to their gut problems. So, what do you think one thing I've thought a lot about is we've spent so much time in medicine focused on human cells, and we're just starting to appreciate the microbiome. Do you feel like that in the new health, the way that you and I wanna see the healthcare sort of emerge, do we need to sorta look at microbes as having an influence over our over the human cells and stop trying to manipulate the human cells but actually work on changing the microbiome to enhance whatever is going on inside our cells?
Yeah, you're hitting on a very popular new concept in the world of the microbiome. There's the concept of the so-called holobiont. That is, that
Mm,
we're not humans. We are humans accompanied by trillions of microbes in every orifice. And
exactly.
the crazy thing is, as you know, is all the organs we thought were sterile are not. They're teeming with microbes. The brain, the urinary bladder. You know, I've
Mm,
treated thousands
yeah,
of urinary tract infections over the years because, and you always think, oh, you want your urine to be sterile. No, you don't. You want your urine to be filled with microbes, but the right microbes. There's a really cool
yep.
conversation going on in the gynecologic world, and that is the
Mm,
urinary microbiome is determined by the vaginal microbiome because we can't really
mm,
directly change the urinary microbiome. There's nothing you can do to change the directly, but you can change the vaginal microbiome. So some of the new science in the
mm,
vaginal microbiome shows that a healthy vaginal microbiome is dominated by Lactobacillus crispatus and other Lactobacillus species,
mm,
and is lacking in bacteria like Gardnerella vaginalis and Adipobium and fecal microbes. Now, here's the twist:
mm,
1/3 of all women in the world have the opposite. They have very little Lactobacillus crispatus and other lactobacilli, and they have proliferation of Gardnerella and Adipobium and fecal microbes, as well as Candida and fungal organisms.
mm.
A third. And the big risk beyond just irritation, discharge, etc., the big risk is premature delivery of a child in a third of the women in this
Interesting.
world. And so that sign, and that is the presumptive cause of repeated urinary tract infections, or at least a lot of them, because the
Interesting.
spottis in the urine
You
is protective.
You know what's interesting that you bring up the vaginal microbiome? I recently have been looking at what the connection between the health of the vaginal area, including the cervix, and how it plays out in the other parts of our body. So, for example, in utero, I don't know if you knew this. I just recently learned this that our vocal cords and our cervix originally were of the same tissue, and then they separate out and they become your vocal cords. They become your cervix. And if you look at the tissue themselves, like if you actually go and look at them, Google them, you'll see they look very, very similar. So could you use, the yogurts like this? I don't know if you're doing it like as a douche or if you have to you just eat it, but could we start to look at the vaginal area, the microbiome as the vaginal area to start to affect all other areas in a woman's body? Do we know anything about that?
Yeah, that's an emerging concept. This idea of crosstalk between species and also
Mm,
translocation. So I find it remarkable. A woman can take, let's just say, Lactobacillus crispatus. By the way, when you and I talk about these things, your listeners have to know that sometimes we're talking about the science that has not yet been commercialized. So it's really tough to find
mm.
Lactobacillus
Well said.
crispatus, but you can. Like Jarrow has a product called Jarrow Women, and that does have the crispatus in it.
Mhm,
So there's going to be more and
mhm.
more products that do this because there's some hurdles to go through, regulatory and commercial, going from the laboratory to a commercial product. And so there's a delay of typically a couple of years between science and then commercialization. But I find it remarkable. A woman can take, let's say, Lactobacillus crispatus orally, and it will populate her vagina and her bladder. Well, how did it get there? There's no
Mhm,
connection that anybody knows of. Well, it's presumptively by contiguity because they're near each other in the perineum. You know, they're real close, so they
mm.
somehow share. So
Yep.
that's also true. It's kind of creepy. It's also true of the fecal microbes. So that whole area
Mm,
is a big party area. It's got all kinds of stuff being shared. So, but there's also
interesting.
another a reverse example would be um, 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 Fusobacterium nucleatum. This is a microbe that we all have in our mouths. By the way, the mouth is the second most densely populated microbiome after the colon. So, so think
Yep,
about that when you kiss your honey.
yep,
Well, one microbe that
yep.
proliferates is called Bacterium nucleatum. And if you have gingivitis or even worse, periodontitis, the populations of Fusobacterium go way up. And then it implants itself in your
Okay.
colon, where it's associated with colon cancer.
Wow.
If I take that microbe, put it in a mouse with a normal colon, it gets colon cancer. If you look at colon cancer from a human that's been taken out, it's filled with Fusobacterium. Now, here's the kicker. How did it get from here to colon? Well, swallowing, right?
Mm,
No, it gets there by
right.
the bloodstream. Yeah. So crosstalk. It's becoming clear now.
Yeah.
How about another one? If a woman takes Bifidobacteria infantis, like the Avivo strain, EVC001 strain, that has the best science from UC
Mhm.
Davis. If a woman takes that
Okay.
microbe, it populates her mammary glands so that when she breastfeeds
Interesting.
the baby gets it. Well, how did he get from the gastrointestinal tract to the mammary gland? But it's
Right,
become clear, as you
right.
point out, there's crosstalk of all sorts going on, good and bad. You
Yeah.
know what worries me is there's some very elegant work from Ruth Alonso's lab in Spain where they did something crazy. They took brains of people who died, young people who died in traumatic accidents like car accidents, and then stained the brain for fungi. No fungi. They took the brains of people who were
Hmm.
old but didn't die of dementia, moderate fungal infestation. They took the brains of people who died of Alzheimer's, filled like a Wyoming sky at night, filled with fungus. They took it further. They looked for fungal proteins and
Crazy.
DNA in the bloodstream and the cerebrospinal fluid in people filled with fungal proteins and DNA. And then the real kicker, a Harvard group about 2 years ago showed that uh, the stuff that accumulates in people with dementia is beta amyloid plaque, and there are drugs
Mhm.
effectively reduce beta amyloid plaque. There's several of them, and they all make your dementia worse. so,
Mm.
so
Wow.
the theory is undergoing change. Maybe beta amyloid plaque is not the cause. Maybe it's a consequence. So this Harvard group looked at
Mm.
the microbial effects of beta amyloid plaque. It's not a very good antibacterial. It's an excellent, potent antifungal. Isn't that interesting? Well, what the
It's
hell?
crazy.
Does that mean there's an important subset of people with dementia that's due to fungal infestation? And if so, where did it come from? Well, some people like Dale Bredesen say the sinuses. I say it's the colon. I say it's the GI tract. Because as you know,
Mm.
as common as SIBO is, CFO, small intestinal fungal, or at least colonic overgrowth of fungi, is also very, very common.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, when I listen to you talk, I'm like, "We have got health all wrong." And I just so grateful, again, the books you've put out into the world, have transformed the paradigm. You're shaking the paradigm up. So, I love that because the paradigm of health is not working. If it was working, we wouldn't have all the chronic diseases that we have. So I just so grateful for you. What's the next book, by the way? Do we have another book in your brain there?
Well, I do, and I don't want to say the title, the working title, because I think it's a good title. But uh, the question I'm asking or
Yeah,
trying
I
to
get it.
answer, one thing we have to be mindful of, as you know, that you and I talked before we started recording, is that uh, people like you and me and other book authors on health are no longer welcome in big media because of the influence of drug advertising and the
Yeah.
flow of revenue. So, uh, and
Mm,
as I mentioned to you, I had a publisher even say to me, if we can't make money publishing books on health, maybe we won't publish books on health. Well, how do we continue to get this message out
it's horrible.
through books? Well, what if we kind of give it a non health spin? So, one of the things I've been thinking about
Mm,
is, so almost all of us have lost rotary and thereby oxytocin. Does that mean the
mm.
intensity of love and affection today is much less? than it was 50 years ago or
Mm,
100 or 1,000 years ago. And could this be at least part of the explanation behind the exploding divorce rate, suicide, depression,
mm,
isolation? I'm not so silly as to suggest that's the sole solution, but I think it's a big part of the solution because I see it all reversing now. People are telling me, ladies will
yeah.
come in and say, my husband is normally not very demonstrative. He's been eating the yogurt, and he says to me out of the blue, "Hey, honey, I've always liked you. I like you more now. Come here, sit next to me, please."
Wow.
Or
Wow.
I
Yeah.
introduce myself to strangers in line for coffee at Starbucks, something I never did before. Or I accept the differences of opinions.
Cool.
They have a right to their opinion, and I respect it. I mean, a complete change, but is it also true for the intensity of love and affection? I think it is. Tough as hell to prove. I
Oh,
got
but
the
you can do it.
I got the
I love where
oxytocin.
you're going with this.
So
Go
one of the
ahead.
things that I did was I got the oxytocin blood and salivary levels on 3 indigenous populations. So I
Mm,
called Paul Zach. He's a faculty member at Claremont in California, and he did something crazy. He went into the deep jungles of New Guinea, and he says the first thing that strikes you is the stink of filthy humans. But he said they were
mm,
warm, wonderful people. But he said they were so unbathed that it took 4 alcohol swabs just to find a vein. So, so he
mm.
draws their blood and
Wow.
runs their oxytocin levels. So these are people living in the jungle. There's no antibiotics, there's no glyphosate, there's no herbicides and pesticides, and there's no stomach acid blocking drugs, none of that stuff. So presumptively untouched by Western life. Well, the problem is the methods to measure oxytocin are so wildly variable, it's hard to make sense of. So I was hoping to prove that primitive people have much higher levels of oxytocin than we do, but I'm not sure I can prove that.
Yeah.
Makes you
Wow.
wonder,
Well, I hope you do. And yep.
what if these
Go
kinds of
ahead.
superficial interactions that are popular with modern people, like Tinder, back and forth and online dating, is this a symptom of the
Mhm.
distance we've drawn between each other from the loss of oxytocin? I think it is. And I wouldn't have said that, except that now I see all the people restoring oxytocin and what's happening to them.
Amazing. Oh my gosh. And if you can restore oxytocin in humans, which restores love and connection and compassion, you will be even more of a hero than I already think you are. So this has been amazing. Again, I really appreciate the way your brain thinks. I really appreciate your work. So keep writing them. Keep more books is better for the world. So one last question. We've been doing this year on my podcast, I've been asking everybody if they have, all my guests, if they have a gratitude practice. Do you have a daily gratitude practice that you do?
I should. I do not, though I remind myself that is a really powerful practice because it seems to bring good things to you. So thank you for the
Yes.
reminder. But I will thank you for what
Okay.
you're doing because as we talked about,
Mm,
we live in a
thank you.
world where the pharmaceutical industry is so dominant that they have essentially um, uh, shut us down. That is, we can't get on
Yeah.
morning news, we can't get on talk shows anymore. Whereas I was on numerous shows and it all stopped. For me, it
Yeah.
stopped with the publication of the
Yeah.
Undoctored book. But for most of us, any topic now on health and nutrition is no longer welcome. So what you're doing, the podcast world, blogs, websites, summits, all the things that you and others are doing are 10 times more important today than it used to be.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I love that. And, I'm on a mission to change the way that we approach women's health in our care world, but we're not going to do it through the doctors. We're going to do it through the women, the individually. And what you just talked about today is key. I can't wait to integrate this into my fasting protocols for women. So thank you again. This is the highlight of my week. So thank you.
Thank
Where do
you.
people find where do people find you? For sure, they got to go buy your book, but where else can they find you?
Right. So the Super Gut book available everywhere. And my kind of central site is drdavisinfinitehealth.com. There's a blog with 2,000 articles on it. There's a very busy forum, discussion forum with several hundred
Mhm.
thousand posts. There's also, I have an inner circle, which is a membership site. But every once a week, we have
Mhm.
about a 90-minute to 2 hour long conversation, Zoom, two-way Zoom. Typically, 75, 80
Yep.
people show up at any one time And we talk about rotary yogurt, the air device, diet, thyroid, all the stuff that's relevant to what you and I do.
I love it. I love it. Well, keep writing books, keep educating us all. And again, thank you so much. This is so helpful, and I can't wait to get it out into the world. So appreciate you.